Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Andrea Kovacs, and I'm the Vice President for Marketing here at Albertus. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to our Creative Journey lecture series featuring Charles Rafferty. If you haven't already, please help yourself to refreshments. You'll learn I'm all about food, so I need everyone to eat. And before I introduce Charles, I do want to acknowledge some members of the Albertus community. I'd like to welcome Sister Ann Kilbride, who is our interim president. And I see some other members of the Administrative Council. If you give a little wave, we won't call you out by name. I do also want to thank our marketing interns, Jason Dunn and Victoria Walter, who have been knocking themselves out on this event. And you will see Victoria running around taking photos, so pretend you don't see her. Candidates are best. I also want to thank Lynn Hennessy, who's not here tonight, but she really helped us put all the details together. I would also like to extend a warm welcome to Lauren Parisi, who's the editor of our student literary magazine, Breakwater. Now, this is the 45th anniversary of Breakwater this year, correct? So 45 years of student publication, one of the fine traditions here at the college. So she is here, and some other members of the Breakwater editorial team, perhaps some students who have submitted written works and other pieces of art. Congratulations on 45 years. This issue, by the way, is going to be publicly presented. I was told I have to give my copy back. This issue will be publicly presented on Friday at 11 a.m. in Rosary Hall. I think there are going to be readings and refreshments, so show your support and come on out. This series, or this lecture, is the third in our Creative Journey lecture series, which is a quarterly speaker series focused on the arts at Albertus. Previous lectures have featured art therapist Dr. David Gussick, who presented as part of the Master of Arts in Art Therapy program. You may be aware Albertus has the only Master of Arts in Art Therapy in Connecticut. And then internationally recognized Connecticut artist Tony Falcone, whose artwork is actually permanently installed on campus. He was commissioned by the Board of Trustees to do the official portrait of Dr. Julia McNamara, President Emerita. So he also did a talk. And now we are very privileged this evening to have Charles Rafferty, who's not just a renowned poet, but he's also the director of the MFA program in writing here at Albertus Magnus College. So how right it feels to stand here before this wall inscribed with the titles of every text or book that was written by our patron, St. Albert, as we prepare to hear Charles' insights into his own writing process. So I think there are 31 works here, and Albert was a prolific writer, and if you think back, this is the 13th century, there was no like autocorrect or any of those things we so take for granted. He actually had to be able to spell, and edits were a nightmare. He wrote on a variety of topics, and I don't want to get this wrong, so I'm going to quote from our course catalog. His encyclopedic writings include works on physics, geography, astronomy, chemistry, biology, philosophy, and theology. He was afraid of nothing, and he wrote about everything. Truly, St. Albert understood the power of the written word. So tonight, Charles will read from his poetic work, and he will talk about his writing process, the unpredictability of inspiration, the need for a schedule, and the absolute necessity for revision. So Charles is the author of 12 published collections of poetry and has contributed poems, stories, and essays to publications such as The New Yorker, which is actually where I first discovered you, before I ever had a chance to meet you, Oprah Magazine, The Southern Review, and Poetry Daily. Charles is also the 2009 recipient of a fellowship in creative writing from the National Endowment for the Arts, and he has received grants for his work from the Connecticut Commission on Culture and Tourism. I do understand, so I heard someone ask earlier, can your books be purchased? I know the bookstore is staying open a little bit later tonight. I know they have some of Charles' work there. Maybe you could get him to sign them, just to disarm a little bit. But if you want to stop in after the lecture, the bookstore is located next to the McDonough Gallery, which, by the way, is featuring a student exhibit, which is opening tonight, and there's another exhibit opening in Walsh Hall tonight, correct? So we have a lot going on. And if you're tired of the arts, the athletic banquet is right after that, so, okay. On a final note, I want everyone to know we are live streaming tonight's event, so if you have friends who wish they could have been here but could not, they can certainly be watching it right now online from our website, or they'll be able to watch it in another day or so on the MFA page of the website. So that's it for all the housekeeping. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Charles Rafferty.
you so much. You guys can hear me okay like this? Okay. Hopefully I don't have a wine mustache. I should have gotten it. I can put this down. So creativity is always a funny topic for me. I have to confess that I'm not a believer in the, waiting for the muse to strike you. I think in 35 years of writing poems, I've had maybe one poem, come out right on the first try, and even that one wasn't that good. So I'm a big believer in revision. I think if you're a writer, you're actually more properly called a reviser. And to trick yourself into writing well, I think what you have to do is find a way of surprising yourself. Robert Frost says that if there are no tears in the writer, there will be no tears in the reader. And I think that's another way of saying you as the writer have to find some way of just surprising yourself in the act of composition. And over the years, I've tried a number of different strategies to do this. One of my favorites is to use a rhyme and meter scheme to try to trick you into saying something that you didn't think you would be able to say. For instance, if you're writing a love poem and one of your rhyme words is uranium, you're really not going to have that many choices. You could rhyme cranium, or maybe if you want to slant it, you could use subterranean or Albanian. And I think giving in to the pressures of the form in those instances will get you a better poem. It's going to take it in a direction that you didn't anticipate when you sat down to begin composing. And I thought for tonight I would begin with a poem that I've written in rhyme and meter, and it's an old poem. It's from, I'll just say, the early 90s. And I'm still revising it. This is the most recent version of it. And it's called On Finding the Skunk Cabbage Rising from the Swamp Behind Our House. In early March, these first and purple syllables of the year returned me to a summer swamp where everything disappeared. Carpenter frogs and water snakes, my footprints in the muck that sucked the shoes right off of me. I stayed until the dark reminded me to go, listening to the wind in the branches above me, surrounded by the wet music of crickets. I hunched in a world I didn't know how to name, and now this crunching mud, this rising stink and softening air, all of it turning to words. Other strategies that I've used for composing and tricking myself into getting away from autobiography is to basically invent situations that I think will be difficult to get out of. To start the poem with an absurd premise, for lack of a better phrase. And I'd like to read one of those poems to you now. It's called Appetites. When he gets home, she is drinking from the aquarium, and as she brushes the hair back to give him her face hello, he swears he can see the ragged fin of a damselfish sucked in. What kind of woman is this, who eats his fish in secret, whose salty kiss he's starting to understand? There was a time when her nails were tipped with black crescents. Days later, he discovered the scoop marks where her fingers had been in the dirt of the potted palms. Another time, her mouth had tasted like dimes, and he regretted the coin collection, the little gods and Indians that lived underneath his socks. Suddenly, he has an explanation for his missing keys, the remote control, the photos in the album removed like words in a steady redaction of his past. Could she really have been swallowing his life while he kissed her hard and paid the bills? He remembers her penchant for negligees and dirty stories, the arch of her body above him. And there it is, his breath devoured without effort or malice, as if it were the plaything of a woman grown bored who hasn't come round to cruelty. This is another poem in that same vein. In fact, I have to give a shout out to one of my students who prompted this poem. I had a student years ago who never handed anything on time, and suddenly 2 weeks in a row she got her stuff in early, And I asked her, when I saw her in class, so what's going on? And she said, well, I'm living every day as if it were my last day. And I thought that was great because it worked for her. But then I thought if I applied that to my own life, I'd never get anything done. So this poem is called Theory. If we lived each day as if it were our last, we'd never get anything done. Can taxes or snow tires ever supersede the honey of a girl? We would eat the foods that hurt us, rare pork, blowfish, the sizzling fat of anything. Everywhere the concussion of mediocre wine pushing us down to the couch. The piano would be left untuned, the children unvaccinated, my haircut put off until I became at last a shaggy corpse that no one will bury, because the mortician won't answer his phone as he works like a rat at the hooks of your bra. You won't even ask if his hands are clean. Another strategy that I found very useful in tricking myself into saying something that I didn't know I could say was to adopt a persona or a speaker who is obviously fictive. I'll read several poems in that vein. This one is called, before I tell you the title, I'll just say that he's somebody who's in love with the wrong thing. And it's called The Arsonist Tells His Story to the Attorney. It got so bad I never saw the same girl twice. When I told one about the barn I burned, how the flames slid across the rafters, exciting the whole frame into a frenzy it hadn't felt since it was trees on a stormy night, she made me stop the car, and her unkissed thighs walked back to town, leaving me my hands, a hot silence that had to touch everything. I eventually stopped dating. I spent my Saturday afternoon scouting out buildings that reminded me of girls, ugly girls, who had asked their mothers for makeup and been refused. That's where I came in, like some big-hearted Avon lady, moistening the floorboards with gasoline, touching a match to someplace appropriate. I did it for the beauty and for the fire that came, transforming a shack to a red-haired woman in an orange dress who kicked her hem above her head to the crackling of castanets. And I'll follow up with this one, which is another I love you and I want to burn your house down poem. It's called Staying in Love. There is a woman you love, so you set her house on fire late one Saturday night to see her descend the trellis from her second-story bedroom in her sexiest chemise. And because she is rich and there are no other houses, and because you have cut the phone lines that connect her to everything but you, it is up to you to rescue her cat and put the fire out. You do, and she is grateful, and she doesn't think to ask why you were there in her backyard, reeking of turpentine with her garden hose unraveled. The two of you married, and you are confident she cannot leave you, for you are a man with a mind for disaster. You spend your life tinkering with her brakes or loosening boards on the steps that lead away from you, and you are always there to punish the man you hired to grab her purse. Your love for her is only safe when the world is rigged for ruin. I'll switch gears for a moment. Somebody once complained years ago, I have two daughters, and somebody complained once that I never write anything for my daughters, which was true. And I took that as a challenge to sit down and write something for them. And this is the poem that came out of it. It's called Advice for Beautiful Daughters Entering a World of Scoundrels. Except for me, all men are liars. They will always say they were listening. They will always say you're welcome to the pie upon their plate. You cannot hold these things against them utterly. Like a nail, they move well in only one direction. Men are like this because you are beautiful. You are what the loneliest of them pay for. Because what good is money if they cannot have at least the illusion of beauty's proximity? Thus the magazines and strip clubs, the leering, awestruck stares of every man around you. So put them through whatever test your mother recommends, but know that they will fail, that anyone passing successfully deceived you, as I have now, your flawed and steadfast father. I think I mentioned at the beginning that I'm a big proponent of having a writing schedule. I think if you're waiting for the muse to strike, you're probably never going to produce anything. And my thinking is this, that if we were in ballet class, or if we were giving a ballet recital, all of us would probably be horrified at the idea of slipping into a leotard and giving a performance, unless you had practiced for years before that moment. And I think writing is the same thing. You have to practice as if it were you're playing piano or you're learning to paint. Very few people get it right on the first try, unless you're a stone-cold genius like Arthur Rimbaud. I'm always on the lookout for inspiration. I try to write every day, for at least an hour, sometimes more if I can fit it in. And the things that I'm on the lookout for are, headlines, factoids, anything that's going to strike my fancy, where I can just try to work it into a poem. And so this is a poem that resulted from one of these factoids that I heard. I don't know how true it is. In fact, in researching it, I've heard other people come up with other numbers, but the numbers are all small. So this poem is called, "After Hearing There Are Only 7,000 Stars Visible to the Naked Eye." With its better eyes, does the house cat cry beneath the majesty of 70,000 stars? Does the owl climb into the rabbit's back underneath a hailstorm of light? How many pictures could I make with more stars, and how many different stories? This is what I wonder below my own wedge of sky, interrupted by maple branch and rooftop, the air smudged with what escapes from so many street lamps and passing cars. A soul could starve in this impoverished light, a less fabulous infinity than what we need after so many bone-bright days. This poem is called Autobiography, and I guess before I read it, I should say that I think that autobiography is probably it can be the death of you as a writer, because if you cling to the fidelity of the lived life, you're likely to not be as concerned with the fidelity of the poem or the story. And I think it's important to think about poems as fictive exercises. People have no problem doing that with novels and short stories, right? Nobody thinks that Stephen King is a murderer, or that he's actually encountered all these ghouls and monsters. But with poets, I think we presume that it's an autobiographical experience that we're overhearing. And I just don't think that's the case. And I think if we can get into the habit of seeing our life as just material that is plastic and that can be molded, we'll be the better for it. So this poem is called Autobiography. I am writing it as if it were a ransom note, cutting the letters from implausible headlines, the ones about women giving birth to raccoons and lottery winners grown suddenly kind. It's taking longer than I thought. The scissors are often unworkable in my cramped and crooked hand, and it's nearly impossible to get a good rhythm having only some commas and question marks. Each morning I open the papers attempting to paste together the next sentence of my life. It is my pyramid, my Chinese wall, my own Colosseum where everyone suffers, forever making me lonely. One night keeps coming back, when the moon was a plate overspilling with kisses. It hasn't looked that way in years, and the stars have taken on the gaudy, less magical flash of Christmas tree tinsel on a windy curb. When I finish this book, I will stuff it into your arms, letting you know the things you missed, the price of it, the cost, exactly what I'm owed. Well, I know there are a lot of writers in the audience tonight. And if you're a writer and you've begun sending your work out for publication, it's, you have to have a thick skin because it always comes back with, we're not interested. And as bad as that is, getting these form rejection letters, I always thought that there's a worst case scenario that you could come across. And that's what this poem is about. It's called Form Letter. We regret to say that nothing you have written has held our interest or ever will, so long as we both speak English. In the future, you should not consider us a possible venue for your poems. Think of us as the North Korean interior, a closet of the Kremlin, a place forbidden to all but those with perfect passports, big enough bribes. You should not take this last part as encouragement. Nor should you try submitting under a famous name with the intention of changing it on the galleys. We want you to know we are never overstocked, that we clamor for the pause that follows articulation of something we needed but didn't know how badly until at last it crossed our desks. Understand that if we were dictators of a totalitarian state, we would pour molasses into your typewriter. We would confiscate your mailbox. We would cripple the tips of your fingers. We do not hope to spare your feelings by the impersonal nature of this reply. Several of our staff would love to point out just how and why you suck. But that would require effort, more in fact than you've put into your poems. Yours was the writing we had in mind as we copied this note 10,000 times. This is called The Man with the Wooden Soul. On a certain day, he reached inside to find a wooden one nested where the bloody one had been. It was a lousy reproduction, full of splinters and knots like little lidless eyes, not even a smear of finish. It came with the clarity of cancer, of adulterers who have been found out and decide to admit to everything. He began by making pronouncements, that everything gorgeous in the sky above his house revolved around something else, that nothing was so brief as the season of flower scent carried away by bees, that the women of the world, while beautiful, could only save so much of you. He started to polish it, grinding it down, soaking it in varnish darker than molasses, till it looked like a piece of piano wood. It reminded him of music practice when he was just a boy, of metronomes and scales, how he only knew where his fingers were if they stumbled on perfections of arpeggio and chord. On good days, his hands had traveled the keys like a musical zipper. It was a sound he expected to hear when the world opened up for him once and for all, like flowers or surgery, a fist releasing a tiny moth, its wings uncrumpled and fluttering forth. This is called Fire Eater. She dated a fire eater for 2 months one summer. He stunk of kerosene and claimed he couldn't taste her. It was like dating someone blind in the mouth. She stopped bathing. Her hair became tangled. She wore the same panties day after day. Her general sense of grooming degenerated in the presence of this man, the way the girlfriend of a thief might offer to drive the getaway car or one day hold the gun. When asked by friends why she went with such a man, she had no answer ready. All she could think of was the way he ate fire late at night in his circus trailer, the crackling torch, the illumined throat, the blackness of the air that held her down. I actually have a lot of these circus freak poems. Here's another one of them. It's called Smithereens. She dismantled machines using only her mouth, things like toasters and staple guns. Her show consisted of a tiny stage, a fringe of tinsel, a spotlight bathing whatever had been laid before her in a shade of blueberry he could almost taste. He watched her every night, and of course she was beautiful in her sequined dress and smoky hair, a as she kissed and bit the various machines into pieces that couldn't be smaller or more separate. His favorite machine was an old-time clock of any kind. It was something about its quick disintegration when the face came finally off. She removed each gear with the tip of her tongue, and it would shine there like a brass wafer. Night after night, he paid $5 to watch, to fall in love with the protracted pause that was her body, breaking things down in a blueberry sky no bigger than one room. He got wise, though. He saw how the bolts had been loosened, how each machine was never so complex as a player piano. He knew she could never put these things together again, yet he longed for the pink and muscular slug of her tongue to lick the Seiko from his wrist, stopping his life for as long as she liked. It would be something, he thought, to be destroyed by a mouth as pretty as hers, to be kissed to smithereens in that blueberry light, an explosion that took its time. This is another poem that was inspired by a factoid. It's called Luna Moth, and I think you'll understand what drew me to it. In fact, maybe I should explain what a Luna Moth is. It's one of these giant green moths that you see every now and then in Connecticut. If you haven't seen it, it's on the Lunesta commercial, this giant flat-end thing that comes to visit you in your sleep. Luna Moth. If when you hold me, I break like a Luna moth, leaving you a chip of powdered fog, a blind and beautiful eye. If you spend the evening deciphering the cursive of wounded flight below the headlamps that ignite the steel of the garbage cans. If you are appalled that something this broken is hauling itself aloft, however briefly, above the oil spots blooming all over the driveway, consider this. The Luna Moth is a moth for only 1 week. He emerges without any mouth. He is only built for loving. I found it useful over the years to try to write poems in sequence. I just get an idea into my head and I think, well, I'll write 50 poems on that subject. And often they end in disaster, but I can come away with it sometimes with a few good poems. And one of the series that I had was I was trying to write a poem for every state of the union. So I had a Connecticut poem, I had a Nevada poem, and so on. But it never got off the ground. Too many of them seemed like, my Nevada poem could just as easily be New Hampshire and so forth. So it was difficult to get it published. But this is one of the poems that I saved from it, and it was my Kansas poem, although I now call it The Problem with Almanacs. And I think the only thing that you need to know about it is it mentions the conch shell, which is this giant seashell that you can buy at knick-knack stores, and it's got a pink inside, and it's a beautiful, glorious-looking seashell. The Problem with Almanacs. On the map, Kansas is pink, an almost rectangle with a corner torn off. It reminds me of the smooth inside curl of a conch, or of a woman, or of certain orchids that grow in jungles where the frogs are poisonous and the cats can kill you. Or of a sunset so colossal, cars pull over to take it in, heedless of errands and dinner dates, the evening news and its ads for antidepressants. But the almanac talks only of wheat and corn, the average reported land values per acre, by type and district. It breaks the population down by income and followed God. No matter the pie chart, there is no statistic for the beauty that must be there. No explanation for so many roads crisscrossing the page I am suddenly wanting to turn. Another of my series poems that never panned out was I had this idea that I'd write a poem for every song on the White Album, which I feel like maybe I should say it's by the Beatles. So, I had a back in the USSR poem, I had a Dear Prudence poem and so forth, but that really didn't go anywhere. But this poem I saved, and it's called, this was my Piggies poem, if you know the album. And it recounts a time when my friend and I were camping out in the woods in Arkansas, and we found this skeleton of a dead pig, and we each took a tooth out of it as a souvenir. This is called The Man Explains His Souvenirs. 20 years ago, the skeleton of a wild pig gleamed among violets while the leaf rot around it grew hot with spring. I slipped the molar out of its grin like an oiled key and took it home, leaving the boar to reassemble if it ever did at a gap-toothed resurrection. I hold it up to show my daughters. They are less impressed each year. I have antlers and trilobites and chips of pretty bedrock from all the places where the sun came up to burn me awake with beauty. Even a turtle shell we used as an ashtray in that first apartment on the bank of a creek that flooded every March and took our trash to sea. All of it sleeps in a basement box, a kind of coffin for my former life, but also a proof that I stooped to the world, that I kept what came my way. I'm going to read a spring poem now. This one is called The Man Who Was Ready. I'm on the brink of daffodils. The backyard snow is full of urine blooms. The mud underneath is ready to be itself. It won't be long before the planet tilts and the birds roll north like marbles. The sap crawls out of the bedrock. The meadow's sublimation makes me feel like a piece of sky, ready to plummet, ready to rain. Up on the mountain, the snow cap wishes towards water, a wildness that doesn't lose pace, no matter the stones crowding its path, no matter the roots of everything. Down here, I'm waiting for the ants to arrive with their shifting script, their message from below. I'm ready for this page, for this square of softening dirt, for this garden of almost daffodils to bang all my air to bells. And I'm actually going to read a story right now, but it might be indistinguishable from a poem. It's very short. It's less than a page. And in fact, I've been writing these very short stories, flash fictions, less than 1,000 words, and also prose poems pretty relentlessly for the last 5 years. I find that there's not much distinction between whether it's a story or a poem. In fact, sometimes I'll send it out as both, depending on what magazines are asking for. This one is called Rio de Janeiro. He flew to Rio without her, believing this trip, like certain cliffs, would give him perspective. He saw the famous statue of God and the slums beneath it climbing. The tiniest birds were beggars, the sun cruel. Everywhere the women ignored his tourist Portuguese. Everywhere the poor were hungry and had steady eyes. The eyes of God were steady too, but on the horizon, where now and then the bottom of a boat was eaten by the world. So I just said I've almost been relentlessly writing prose poems, but I'm going to read a lined poem that I think it's the most recent one that I've finished. And it's actually because I've been a bird owner for 20 years. When my wife moved out to Arkansas with me, she had to leave her job, leave all her friends, and we couldn't have cats and dogs in the house, so we got parakeets. That was her consolation prize. We just recently, all the birds died in the house, finally. And I say that in as loving a way as I possibly can. At one point, my wife was going to a bachelorette party and a bird landed on her head, a cockatiel, and she took it home. So we had that for 20 years. So I've been waiting for the day when we wouldn't have any birds in the house so that I could get a cat. And just recently, my daughter turned the screws on us and she was like, I want a parakeet. And we were like, everybody was telling us we were bad parents for not getting the parakeet. How much trouble could it be? So now we're bird owners again, and I'm bracing for the the next backyard funeral. And so this is a poem written about these other parakeets that we had, and it's called What We Learned from Our Dead Parakeet. We positioned his cage according to the sun. There was a parking lot in one window, a grove of maples in the other. The parakeet sang to both of these views as if they might sing back. Sometimes they did. He learned to imitate the chirping of our neighbor's car alarm. The purple finches called from the feeder as if they were his brothers. That bird was a lesson in how to live. Eat what you were given, shit when you have to, sing for the world beyond your reach. And I think I'm going to close with a batch of prose poems, which is what I've been primarily writing. And I'll start with a couple in this book, Diminution. And I've been attracted to prose poems because although I thoroughly enjoyed writing these kind of absurd premise poems, I started to feel like they were like machines that worked well but became predictable. And for whatever reason, I can't really explain it, the prose poem has given me permission to be wilder than I thought I could be. I don't know why that is, but there's something about not having to worry about the lines of a poem that makes them funner to write. I don't want to say easier, but I enjoy writing them. So I'll read a few of those to you now. This first one is called Grackles, which, if you don't know what a grackle is, it looks kind of like a crow, but it's a smaller version, and they're very noisy. They travel in flocks. They're very boisterous. Grackles. I have always believed that if I jumped out that window, I would turn into grackles before hitting the sidewalk. Hundreds of them. They would take off in all directions, and they would not know each other if weeks later they found themselves together on the same telephone wire. It is not a question of whether remembering or forgetting you is more painful. It has always been whether I wanted to inhabit those yellow eyes, that iridescence, that rusty gait of a song that keeps just ahead of your footfall as you trace the cornfield behind your new house, headed for the river. This next one is, when I was in college, I took an intro to philosophy course, and the very first day I was imparted with the knowledge of the first line of this poem, which I always thought that's such a great factoid. I'm going to write something about that someday. And it took 35 years later to actually make it right. This is called Diminution. Socrates taught Plato, and Plato taught Aristotle, and Aristotle taught Alexander the Great, who founded a city that would house the most voluminous library of the ancient world, until it was burned, until forgetting came back into vogue. The great minds come down through the years like monkeys descending from high branches. Always a leopard is waiting to greet them in the tall grass among the magnetic berries, in the place they should have checked. This one is called A Demonstration of How One Thing Leads to Another. He steps onto the train and realizes, excuse me, I gotta wet my whistle. He steps onto the train and realizes he's missed his stop as he wakes at 40,000 feet above the Andes. He tries to ask the stewardess when they'll land, but by the time he's formulated his question using the English to Spanish dictionary he must have packed that morning, he finds himself in the back of a taxi cab, faltering through Buenos Aires. I'd better phone the office, he thinks, but already he is in the lobby of his favorite brothel, being handed a glass of whiskey. Just one couldn't hurt, he says to himself, as he closes the door behind him and turns to see a woman with her dress in a bunch above her waist. He feels suddenly like he's kneeling at the fountain of unquenchable desire. His lips crack painfully even as he quaffs her over and over until he wakes inside his wife back in Connecticut, atop their heavy sleigh bed, the one he purchased on credit and a whim and for which he threw his back out as he hustled it up the stairs. And there's something about the prose poem. I'm interested in seeing how far apart I can make the connections of the poem and still have it make a kind of sense. And hopefully I'm succeeding on some level. This next one, I think the only thing you need to know is it mentions remoras, which is a kind of fish. If you watch National Geographic, I'm sure you've seen it. There's these sucker fish that hang out on the bellies of the sharks and basically eat what falls out of the shark's mouth. So they're a kind of parasite, though maybe that's not quite the word. They're not sucking their blood, but they're gobbling up the food that the shark forgets about. And this is called The Saddest Bid for Immortality Ever Devised. I used to transcribe my poems on the blank pages of books by famous poets. I imagined they would ride into the future like remoras, suckered to the belly of a powerful shark. But the librarian would always find them and black them out. Later, she resorted to excising the vandalized pages with a ruler and a blade. Those stubs at the end of Paradise Lost in the Mount Laurel Public Library, that's me. And now I'll close with some newer things. This one is called Attraction. She collected men the way a light left on collected bugs. It was an old story, money, gravity, the right amount of cleavage, and yet the most successful route never stops fleeing the seed where it began. The cars of two drunks decide to kiss. The lit match gives in to the windy field. Here's a lesson. When people heard there was an albino deer in the woods behind our house, they set out the apples and corn. The shotgun pellets stuck in our tree go deeper year by year. Marbles. At a certain point, manic depression became bipolar disorder. The world has always been in flux. Just look at the sky. There are fewer stars now than when I was a boy. I cannot say who took them. I cannot remember the pictures that they made. Consider Istanbul. It used to be Constantinople, and before that Byzantium. Nothing endures. I had a jaw men wanted to punch. Now the ground I stand upon feels like it's made of marbles. In Wyoming, they've just begun hunting the grizzly bear again. It is finally safe enough to be killed. I can't get over it. My teeth were once a dazzling white. All three of my brothers were living. The only thing you need to know about this next one is it references the poet Sappho, who is an ancient Greek poet, who survives primarily as little snippets and fragments. We only have one complete poem of hers. And this poem is called The Problem with Sappho. Only one complete poem remains. The rest of it is berries left in the bramble after a visit from midday starlings. For years, I couldn't understand how this redaction moved anyone to tears. She was a dampness in the matchbook. But the world is patient. Eventually, the diamond travels from the mantle to the finger of the woman you love. Eventually, the light from an exploded star arrives to confirm the emperor's power. It's clear now that a very old bruise can tell us how hard someone was punched. The detective solves a murder by the help of a single hair. Archaeologists find a molar and build a face to fit. And I'll read two more. This one's called Status Report. I was out in the yard, standing where the grass butted up against the woods. A dog was barking on the farthest hill. Venus hovered like a drill hole full of light. Meanwhile, some bats began working to unstitch the air above me, and I thought about a girl I hadn't kissed enough. My family was inside. I saw them moving in the lighted squares, practicing algebra, removing mascara. It was like staring into a mortgaged aquarium. Always the wish to stay outside, the need to go back in. And this last one is called Greediness. I counted the water towers. I counted the active smokestacks. These were the breadcrumbs I thought would lead me back. Now I know it's possible to drive so far we forget why we left, that the journey continues even after the car breaks down. I used to think I had no message, but the message is me. Bloodshot and hungry, spilled coffee down the front of my shirt. People of the future, gather round. I have traveled through ink to greet you. Thank you very much. You've been very patient.
Some Q&A, and I know we do have writers and students in the room, and hopefully some questions.
I'm all for it if you've got them.
No, their cups are full. Why, come on.
Well, this is the most embarrassing part of it.
There you go.
Yes.
I'll ask.
You've saved the planted question is coming for you.
About the frequency of your poetry writing, is it really variable? Do you write every day? You talked about the importance of carving out time to practice your craft. I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, I try to write every day, and I'm almost, I'm probably 6 for 7 on a given week. When I commute to work, I have a job down in Stanford. When I take the train, that's like 4 hours. It's a gift because I'm stuck on the train, and I make good use of that. And I find it's very useful just to sit down with a blank piece of paper and just do it. I often don't know what I'm going to be writing. I'll just write whatever comes into my head, and I find that very instructive. That eventually I'll say something that I'm like, ooh, well that image is nice, or that rhythm is nice. And I'll save it, and hopefully as the week's scribblings evolve, I'll see how one or two of them can fit together, and I'll go from there.
Yeah. So just to continue with this, so are there any subjects for you that are censored, or do you just follow pretty much anything?
No, I don't censor anything. Maybe I should, but when I went to school in Arkansas for my MFA program, Jim Whitehead was my instructor. He's dead now. But he had this great insight for me, and he said that, the moment in a poem when you feel like, I really shouldn't be saying that, it's going to be too embarrassing, or what will people think? He said that's the core of the poem. That's what you have to pursue. So I actually actively seek out things that will make me uncomfortable, because I think that it's probably going to make the reader uncomfortable too. And I think that's a good thing. Like, we don't want the reader to be bored. We want them to be, reading every sentence. And one way to do that is to surprise them or to embarrass them. I mean, they're not going to be embarrassed. They'll keep reading. But I think censoring yourself is probably a bad idea. And if it's any consolation, if you're writing poems, there's very few people that are going to read them. So that's the upside to revealing all. Yeah. Sure.
You mentioned in your prose poems that you mentioned things that are far apart, and then yet somehow they still make sense in the poem. How on earth do you do that? Because the things that you bring into the poem are so extraordinarily different, but yet they do make sense. I'm just trying to...
Yeah, I don't have a good answer for that. Trial and error. Like in that attraction poem, I was like, how do I fit a burning field and, a seed that's growing a root and shotgun pellets from the guy that tried to kill the albino deer. It was like an exercise in trying to make all those things fit. And in fact, I'm working on a novel now, and I started out with what I envisioned to be the first chapter and the last chapter. I mean, that has the same character in it, but looking at those two chapters, I couldn't really imagine how I could make them sync up. And so that's what the exercise has been. How do I get from page 1 to page 200 and have that ending make sense with that beginning? And that's just something I like. And it's not planned out. It's got to be trial and error. I have lots of dead ends, and it's like an exercise like that. So it's just if you accumulate enough material, you'll be able to see the connections. poem.
How do you decide where to send your work, and what suggestions do you have for our student writers about publication?
Well, I mean, this simple answer, which is also the one that nobody wants to hear, is to know your market. If you're writing a certain type of poem, you should be looking for journals that publish that kind of poem, which I know sounds obvious, but I know I myself have made that mistake numerous times, where I'm just like, oh, I like the name of that journal, I'll send this poem without ever having researched it or looked at it, and of course it comes back with a rejection, and it's because I didn't know my market. So knowing your market is critical. There's lots of general interest magazines, but there's some magazines that only want to see rhymed poetry. So if you show them even a great free verse poem, they're going to be like, what the heck is this person sending us here? They must not have ever cracked the book. So I think just knowing your market is the best way to go. Yeah.
Do you find that in your writing goals every day you have a specific time of day where you feel most inspired, or a specific setting that you feel most?
Yeah, I mean, early morning is best for me. And when I'm commuting, that kind of is forced upon me because I get an early train. But on days when I work at home, I find that I'm not as good as I could be. I usually roll out of bed and immediately begin work. So that's one of my ongoing resolutions, is to just hold off on that, steal an hour of the day for myself. And I think that's critical for writers. You can't give yourself the worst hour of the day. After the kids are asleep and all the dishes are clean and everything else, at 11 o'clock at night, when you're exhausted, is not the best time to write. So you've got to find a way to make sure you've got good time for your writing. Before I was a train commuter, I just used my lunch hour. Every lunch hour, I would never go out with friends. This is kind of strange. There was a graveyard right next to where I worked, and I would just go sit in the graveyard when I got poems. Or in winter, I would drive my car out into the graveyard, because it was a nice way to just be alone. Nobody could bug me. And, it's only an hour, but a slow drip eventually fills the bucket. And I think you've got to keep the long-term goal in mind. You might not get much done in a half an hour, but a year of half an hour increments, you'll get something. Yeah.
As a young writer, what are some of the names and poems that you read and took influence from?
Well, the biggest influence on me, I think, was probably Stephen Dunn. He's still alive now. He won the Pulitzer Prize a while ago, and I had the happy luck to arrive at Stockton College as an undergrad and to be able to take classes with him. And it was a happy accident, because I was stupid when I signed up for college. I was just like, I like this one because it's in the woods. I didn't think about who would be actually teaching me. But he was actually a genius in the classroom. And even though I don't think I ever wrote a poem that he very much liked, he was very wise about showing me where I had gone astray and suggesting ways that I could fix it. So he was good as a teacher, and he was also good as just somebody to read. When I came out of high school, I was very unwell read. I think I had, probably like many people, I had a fascination with people like Allen Ginsberg and Lawrence Ferlinghetti, just because of their subject matter. In fact, reading, if you know the poem Howl, that is the poem that made me want to be a poet, because it just blew my mind that, in high school I was reading Shelley and Milton, and they're great poets, obviously, but in the hands of a 14-year-old, they're not going to make much of a dent. But Ginsberg just really excited me. And so, he's somebody that got me interested in writing. Stephen Dunn is somebody that got me interested in revising.
I think you have a couple of questions back here,
Sure.
and then maybe Lauren, and then we'll wrap up.
Sure.
I was actually going to ask you about the revision process. Can you talk a little bit about what that was like for you? And
Sure.
Very greatly from before.
Yeah. The question was, how do I revise? And I find that I revise more than I do first drafts. With it, it's impossible to give a perfect answer on this, but I would guess that any poem any poem that I've read tonight has gone through at least 20 drafts, because I don't ever get it right on the first try. I'm really suspicious of people that say, oh, I just dashed this off, it's perfect, here it is. I know that. I understand the impulse to do that because I feel like when I write a poem, I almost always think, this is the one, I don't have to do anything further. But if you let it sit for a while, the mistakes will rise to the surface. So I think that the time component is essential in writing. If you can just write it, get it as far as you can, and then put it in a drawer for 6 months, you'll be rewarded because you're going to pull open that drawer and be ashamed. You'll say, oh my God, all these things that are wrong with it. Of course, you could show it to somebody else. And I've got a friend of mine who I always show my work before I publish it in a book. And I like showing it to him because he's ruthless. Like, he'll just say, you're an idiot. You're going to look like a fool if you publish this. And, he has that objectivity that I do not have. But, in terms of revising, it's just looking at the poem every day and seeing what I can make better. If it's a 20-line poem, maybe I'll fix a comma, change a couple of words, delete a line, and it's still not done. But I know I've made it a little bit better so that the following day when I look at that fresh poem, there'll be other things that I scan for to try to make it better. Okay. And I have to come closer because I'm half deaf.
This is not a very sophisticated question, but I've been asking your advice as another parent and as a professor. My daughter has her MFA in poetry from Sarah Lawrence. She's 28 years old and she's working as a copywriter in New York at an advertising agency. She had this fantasy life that she was going to lead, that she's living in Brooklyn, she's working and writing her poetry on the side. And she has not written anything in the past 2 years. What can I say to her as a parent to try to bring her back? You sound very self-propelled that you just can't stop writing, but I feel that she's reached a point where she isn't putting the time in, and I hate to see her let that go.
Yeah. That's a great question. So the question is, what do you do about somebody who wants to be a writer but hasn't been producing? It's the classic case of writer's block. And, that happens to everybody at a certain point. And I think you just have to fight your way through it. That's probably the answer that is hardest to hear. One way to overcome writer's block is to be a prolific reader. Because if you read people and you get excited about what they're writing, you start to think, well, I can do that, I can steal that. And so that's something that she could do. But I know exactly what your daughter is going through because I went through precisely the same thing. When I told my parents that, I'm going to go to graduate school to become a poet, they were like, all hope is lost. They want children that are going to be doctors and lawyers because it's practical. And poetry, of course, is never going to pay your bills, unless maybe if you're Billy Collins, it'll pay your bills. But most people are not going to be able to make money off of it. And so, I wouldn't be too disturbed about periods where people go and they're not writing, because if they really want to be a writer, they're at least observing and they're on the lookout for stuff. So hopefully she's keeping a journal and she's noting things down, because it will all come to fruition at some point. I don't think that's a terrible thing that she stopped writing for a little while.
Thank you. Maybe
Sure.
one more question, and then we're not kicking anyone out. The event will end, but the wine's not gone, so you can stay and enjoy conversation more.
I was going to ask, how is, when you said to be published, how does that change you when you first started to do it now? Or has it changed for you?
It hasn't changed that much. I mean, I try to keep everything in the mail all the time. That's another key. If you want to get published, many poems that I've eventually published got rejected 10 or 20 times before somebody finally said yes to me. In fact, I've gotten into the New Yorker finally, but I've actually been submitting to the New Yorker since I was 18. I think I was submitting handwritten poems like an idiot. You should never submit handwritten anything to an editor. And it wasn't until I was maybe 45 that they actually accepted something. So it's persistence and having a thick skin. Just because somebody rejects it doesn't mean that it's a bad poem. They might be full up, or they might just not like your poem, or maybe you caught them on a bad day. I mean, I really feel for the editors because, they've got this stack of material that they have to get through, and maybe they have 3 pages to fill in the magazine. So 100 good poems, they're only going to take 3 of them, even though the other 97 were good too. So don't get discouraged, just keep doing it.